So as we look through here, and you've all taken note that there is a pretty significant increase in the salary line, the 100 line up top. There's a combination of things in play there, gentlemen. First being, we had a number of vacancies last year. We're still fighting vacancies this year, which is a combination of factors. One, purely the quantity of applicants. We just don't draw a ton of candidates that are applying for those deputy jobs. That's the first piece of the equation. The second is there are a ton of statutory requirements that go with filling those jobs. There's a comprehensive background that has to take place, a psychological exam that has to take place, a medical exam, a drug screen. All of those are parts of the puzzle. So that's just the statutory side. And then couple that with the sheriff has to, just because somebody meets the statutory obligations, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a great fit for this county. And trying to weed out few applicants to who meets the legal requirements to then finally, who are the best candidates to go provide that service for our citizens, they weed each other out pretty fast. So we're always working to fill those vacancies. We still have vacancies in patrol right now. We have a young kid from Shasta County who we're narrowing in on now. We're down to a psych and a medical to get him on board. So as we fought through last year, we ended up with vacancies for most of the year in the patrol budget. So that's why you see the actual down in that 1.388 million country. 1.685 is the department request. That's based upon if we are full staffed for the full year. So a couple of things impact that. One, based on the agreements between the board and the bargaining units, there was the swap of salary versus retirement costs. So while you'll see the retirement, the employer paid PERS line 204 down there, that's the one glaring vacancy that you see. That was 114 last year. It disappears this year. But in theory, in that swap of retirement pay for hourly wage, so to speak, that ends up back in that top half. So that helps drive that line upward all by itself because that increased. Additionally, most of our folks at some point throughout the year, they're going through the salary progressions from step A to B or B to C, etc. Some of them hit longevities. Some of them end up eligible for post incentives. So that tends to migrate higher every year just as people gain time and tenure and experience and training. So all of those are impacts that drive that salary line. That's probably the most notable in the top half of that budget. In the bottom half of that budget, one of the things that is notable is mileage. If you drop all the way down to the 2900 line, transportation and travel, that's what we're paying a motor pool to keep cop cars on the road. We drive about 500,000 miles a year all over this county, and we're the silver medalists, by the way. HSS drives more than we do. So there's a ton of miles we're putting on the road. It's a big county. We have people scattered all over. That's another pretty big chunk of our budget. The next one I would refer you to pop up to the 2300 line, professional and specialized services. We've asked for 125. That's what we pay for coroner's stuff. So when we talk about autopsies or toxicology reports or any of the things necessary to deal with death investigations, that's what comes out of that line. So that's one of those ones that is completely unpredictable just because we don't know how many coroner's cases we'll have as a baseline, and we don't know how intrusive or how intensive the inquiry is going to have to be to determine the cause of death. So those were a couple of ones that jumped out to us as pretty big numbers or pretty significant changes. But clearly, if the board has any questions about any line in here,
I think your biggest jump is your salaries and wages at the top of the 440,000, and obviously, I think you kind of explained a little bit that earlier that with the closure of the CCF and how you had to integrate back in. Some of that is going to be driven Boschy.
well, that'll be when we get to the jail. This is the patrol budget.
What I'm saying is, it had some ramifications even on the patrol side. I mean, because of how you charged off some of your supervisory costs and stuff. Formula-wise, not a huge amount, but there's factors involved there.
And the other line I'd like to note, there's no significant increase this year, but it's the conferences and training. Last year I came to you and asked for an increase, and we've seen a huge benefit from that. So we asked for, we requested this year at $54,000. Last year in reimbursements from the state for training costs, we received $42,000.
46 and change.
46,000. So, yeah, so
It costs the county about a net $4,000 for us to
Yeah,
put
really?
50 grand worth of training out there.
So I want to just highlight that and thank you, because that was a big deal for us. There were two, that one and the safety line, I'll touch on that in a minute. But the conferences and training, we were able, this year, we talked about coroners, we were able to send 4 people to a 2-week coroners class in Orange County, which is the premier coroners class in the state. We sent 4 people to that. We sent, the undersheriff's been going through a post-command college, which is a real advanced training program for executives. They reimburse all that cost. Sergeant Jones went through the Sherman Block Leadership Institute, and before him, Sergeant Schmidt did. But it's just been a huge opportunity for us to sit there and try to, or to work towards improving the level of, professionalism, training, experience amongst our staff, and I think the people are gonna
Are
see a
we
huge
sure we
thing.
want to send those guys to the Sherman Block leadership team? Because he's coming under some pretty heavy fire right now.
No, that's Baca. Sherman Block's dead.
Oh, that's Sheriff Block, and you're right.
No, Sherman Block was a great sheriff.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say anything about Baca.
Yeah, that guy got there getting hammered. You're right.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a big one. I wanted to thank you for that and highlight it. And the other one is that safety equipment line. I asked for that a couple years ago because it was just becoming impossible to keep up with, body armor, ammunition,
Which
all
one?
the,
That's the 28 or 2701 non-capitalized equipment.
so that one, that's been a huge benefit. We've been able to, there were times when we just couldn't go out and qualify because we didn't have enough ammunition. The body armor our guys were wearing was expired. This next year, really the body armor that our SWAT team wears right now is 15 years old. It's only warranted for 5. So that's top priority moving into this coming year. So that's a big deal to our people. Obviously, we want to make sure they have the basic safety items to help keep them safe out there. So I want to thank you for that too. That's been
And that is a skewed line. That's one that if you look at, you'll say it was only 13,000 in actual, you're asking for 31. We have pallets of bullets pending.
yeah.
So there are previous year orders that are still hanging out there because trying to get ammunition, even for us, is a real challenge right now. So that looks like a pretty small number last year.
You can't get into the Sportsman's Warehouse at Thursday morning and.
And all ours is set aside, it's state bid. We're getting it off the state contract, but
You should
No,
do,
but I understand the issue.
you should do what the city PD do. Their guys just go up and flip a UE there at Roop in Maine and go into Honey Lake Firearm, and Jeff gives them their 1 bullet at a time.
But that's correct. We have about a $10,000 purchase just pending. We've received parts of it, but that's, right now, as soon as the budget's adopted, we're gonna be placing another ammunition order, just to make sure. We don't wanna get in a position where we have no ammo. We've got there a couple times. So what we wanna try to do is store at least.
Don't advertise that.
Well, we have some ammo in our guns, of course, but we don't have enough to go train adequately and so on. But the biggest issue, we've got, between the firearms, the tasers, all that safety equipment, for the longest time, we'd have to wait until the end of the year and see, is there any way we can replace this stuff or get something? And it just became ridiculous. And I think that's one of those commitments that you guys made, and I appreciate it. I think we have to maintain that moving forward.
any questions about patrol?
What's expense 87? Special Department expense 87.
So Karen, check me here anytime. but
Let's not even get that one.
I was going.
Mr. Chairman.
So that's what we pay for to use the general department, the general fund departments, like the auditor, county council, personnel, CAO. So that's divvied out by departments, cost allocation plan for what do our needs cost them.
The county pickpocket system.
I opened this up once before.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, it's a scam.
It's a scam, but you know what, and in anticipation of those questions,
You don't want to talk about it.
no, well, we do want to talk about it, it's cost allocation plan, it isn't part, and.
Sheriff, this doesn't take away from your time, by the
And you
way.
can read this at your
Is this part of
leisure.
public safety?
No, it's nothing to take away from public safety.
Yeah. So, and it shows basically what's included in the cost plan, who we collect from.
Thanks for running this
don't
out, Karen.
collect
Thank you.
from, and what departments are being reimbursed. Anyone? Sorry, that's too much.
No, that's fine.
Anyone?
So you have anything else related to the patrol budget?
You know, the only comment I'd have to make, John, is just a comment in general. It's interesting when you're talking to constituents and they give you comments about it. Some people never think we have enough, and some people think we have too much. You would probably know the names of those who think we have too much. So.
Try and counterbalance that, make sure you
We-
don't ever have two.
But I mean,
two of
the
too many
improvement,
guys.
the improvement in South County is duly noted, and
Well, yeah, and what hurts us somewhat too is, you know, people see a cop on the street, CHP or whoever, and there's a lot of CHP officers in our county, but they still don't do the job of a deputy sheriff. They help us out sometimes, but they don't do our job. You know, they're totally and completely different responsibilities, and I think that to the general public though, a cop's a cop, they don't realize the difference, but, you know, they're trained on, you know, highway work, you know, moving violations and so on. Our guys are trained up on
Everything
completing,
else.
Yeah,
everything else.
You
You
know,
know.
being that you're in the city police force, do you spend most of your time out of the city, or do you spend a lot of time in
No, we spend most of our time out of the city. We spend some time backing up the police department when they're short-handed, but we have some obligations we have to perform within the city. Coroner's cases, someone dies in the city, we have to investigate that. Civil service, I skipped over that, but we have responsibility for certain civil process. So you'll see our guys oftentimes going up to houses in the city, and a lot of times it's related to that. People wonder, well, why are you guys in town? Well, we have some things we have to do in town. But we also
the
back,
county? I mean, the city is in the county.
yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Did you have something, Larry?
Yeah, thank you.
Now that he
How many
represents
unfilled
part of the
positions
city,
and
he can say
salaries
something.
waiting?
Three.
So dispatch. We did ask for some additional and extra help.
Partially because we didn't ask for any increase in overtime. We didn't talk about that, but again, based on the agreements, based on the MOU, we don't expect that many more hours of overtime, but each hour of overtime will cost us more money. It will cost us that 9% shift from retirement into salary, and a lot of times it'll cost us at a time and a half rate against that. So we're trying to do in dispatch, because we had a dispatcher in the workforce that left, that's still around, who's very interested in staying active. Rather than try and boost the overtime budget in dispatch, then we boosted the extra help, hoping that we can keep the overtime costs in check and use extra help, keep Sarah's skills fresh, and, in case we have a crisis or something come up for staffing.
How does that affect the affordable care obligations that we have?
That's gonna be interesting moving ahead. I think those will be questions that we're gonna have to work with the CAO and HSS and everybody, figure out how many hours can we work somebody, how intermittently can they work before we buy into those
Because you
obligations
might,
as well.
on the surface, your plan, under the old paradigm, that's kind of a traditional way to minimize your overtime, but you're gonna find, if you pass certain thresholds, that's gonna come back behind you and will wind up costing you more rather than less. And I don't think that's necessarily what the employee's looking for in terms of giving you that consideration, but unfortunately, one of the unintended consequences is it kind of boogers up that kind of a management practice.
Well, and retirement's always been a concern there too, but the auditor's office has been great. They keep a running tally on anyone that's retired that's working part-time for us, so we know, are we getting close to that 960 threshold where we're gonna be on the hook for those retirement costs. So we try and monitor those things, and obviously that'll be something else we'll have to pay attention to as we have a better grip on what ACA is gonna add to that.
And we're trying the jail, I sort of breezed over the jail, but we're really making effort there too. We are shorthanded in the jail. Some of our people are concerned about, the dangers it poses to them with our low staffing level. So we're trying to augment that with extra help also. We're trying to really be proactive, because we understand the financial status or state of the county. So we're trying to do every low-cost thing we can to augment staffing and, make it a safe place for our people to work. And what we'll do with those people, we're gonna plan on trying to track their hours, but have enough of them to where we don't run into issues. Where I think we're gonna have issues with ACA are the seasonal employees, the ones that work 40 hours a week all summer long for us. Those are the ones that are gonna present more of an issue for us, but we have to have those people. It's just hard to find a part-time deputy sheriff because of the level of training they have to have nowadays. The only resource you have to pull from are retirees, are it. You know, unless you got someone who happens to be able to put themselves through the police academy and then a 4-month field training program, but
How about retirees from other areas that retire here that have the background?
we've had some of those. That was one of our ones this last year. Fortunately, on the off-season, he experienced some medical issue, so he can't work for us anymore, but it's a shame. Yeah, he worked for, he's a full-time deputy for Santa Cruz County, and they were quoting for us for a number of years.
And just as a reminder on dispatch, the city police department gets charged 40% of the actual dispatch costs. So we get a ton of service here for about 60 cents on the dollar when it all shakes out in the dispatch center. The next one is the jail. This is an interesting one. If you look at that salary line now, 1.253 last year to a 1.395. Again, you're talking about a 9% largely bump because of that, because of the agreement, offset by the what was 109 last year in employee retiree costs that are now gone. So there is about $140,000 increase offset by the $109,000 decrease because you're not paying the retirement anymore. And again, people hitting the next step, people getting the longevity, people getting some kind of other incentive pay has other impacts there as well. The only other one that we wanted to specifically touch on in the jail was food. If you look down at the 1300 line, it was 223 last year. It's sitting at 225. Oh, I'm sorry. Because the budget amount last year was 150. So this was a big one. We only budgeted 150. It kind of skews it when you look at the actual, because the 223, if you look at the prior year actual, that's what the budget was for last year, $1.50. That's driven by a higher population and higher food costs and a fuel surcharge that comes with everything that gets delivered to us, which is, you know, largely a lot of that produce and the meat and the food that has to come to us. So there were some pretty big jumps there. Those are the two most significant jumps in the jail, but clearly if there's any questions about the budget piece of that.
You're taking in the out of county people like from Shasta and whatnot. There was an article I gave to John, I'm assuming you read it. I mean, how much does that tie in? Is that something you can maybe raise your rates on a little bit to get a little more income in?
We did this year. We raised our rates from last year to this year, and that's why it was up.
From 63 to 69.
Yeah, to 69. Right now, we only have 3 of those people in our custody, but, you know, we want to charge a reasonable rate.
And the difficulty here, and there's a fixed cost to run in that jail, whether there's 50 people in there or 100, because there has to be somebody in control, there has to be somebody in the special housing. So we have fixed posts that have to be staffed. So the true cost of adding a Shasta County inmate, we're talking about really 3 meals a day and a little more laundry, but you know, the lights are already on, the heat's already on, the people are already there. So that whole daily jail rate is really a moving target, because if our population shrunk by 50 inmates tomorrow, the budget wouldn't shrink by a ton. The food would go down, hopefully the medical would go down, but the fixed cost to keep people there, to keep the lights on, to keep the heat going wouldn't go down. So our daily jail rate would go through the roof if you look at the whole budget divided by the amount of inmate days that we house folks. So that really is a tough variable when we're trying to figure out, you know, what does it really cost to keep people in jail. But the real cost of adding the Shasta County inmates, that's been a clear benefit for us.
But don't those, that rate also incorporates a prorated share of what that overhead cost is? Should.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the difficulty, if you look at our daily jail rate though, Jim, over the years, when before we ran a CCF, or before we ran the CCF, and we only had X amount of bodies working in the jail, the very next year, our daily jail went up dramatically.
Well, that's
because the budget increased by $1 million, and the population really didn't, so it really is a hard thing to put a fine
Well,
point on.
you were able to utilize the CCF to shoulder a chunk of the operating costs of the jail. And we knew that when the CCF went away.
And the blended staffing plan was monstrous.
And the other thing with Shasta is we have full discretion on whether or not we keep the people they send to us. And for the most part, they've been real low-level offenders. One that was working in the motor pool up until last week was a diesel mechanic. they're on a low level offense for a couple of years, working in our motor pool. Is actually, we got a lot of benefit out of having his skills out in that motor pool, so it has potential to be a win-win as long as we get the right kind of inmates.
Talk about a paradigm shift, and this might be just as good a time as any, because there's never a good time to throw out, and it's not gonna happen with this budget, but I think it's something that we need to have a discussion, and I think the board needs to, include it in coming months, and maybe Marty, can help us how to approach tackling that, and it deals with the overall jail kind of operation. And we have basically one facility that we've mothballed half of the facility because of the closure of the CCF. We have, I know probation is coming up next, and she's in the room, and we'll be able to address this question when we get to the probation parts of the budget in terms of cost. We have a juvenile hall which was built over time in two different instances. We received grant funding. The initial grant funding was a small amount, built the original footprint, and then came back a few years later and added the larger component. It was designed to be a regional facility. I think the amount of regional utilization has been minimal at best. We were supposed to have contracts with Plumas and MODOC, and then other counties would join in on it. And I don't think either Plumas or MODOC, they met basically the bare minimum of that in terms of, yeah, in
You
terms
weren't cheap.
huh?
You weren't cheap.
Well, and it's not cheap to run it, and that's the point I want to
That's
get
it,
to,
yeah.
is, for a small county to try to operate a juvenile detention facility, I think maybe is a thing of the past, and it's one of the things that, just like we closed the library, maybe we have to look at the potential closure of the juvenile detention facility. If that was to happen, and given the dynamics, and John has been very good at talking about the territorial prison that our county jail has become, and given what the state's looking at with, the funding, for constructing some additional capacity to deal with particularly that 10,000, lot of folks that the Supreme Court says they have to do something with between now and the end of the year, is the prospect of, if we were to close, because the juvenile hall is, half of it is mothballed. I mean, it's not even being utilized. We're only using a portion of it, and I'm not sure to what extent we'll be able to get to those numbers next. But, for having that kind of underutilization of that facility, and if we were to close the juvenile part of it, of the possibility of converting that over to the jail operation, where I know you had issues of segregating the female population from the adult population, the male population, and then you have the AB 109 aspect coming in, interacting with, you might say, the lower level petty crimes and stuff, and the DUIs and that kind of nature, and how that kind of cross-fertilizes and creates problems, is maybe taking the facilities we have and bring about our own realignment, in which we maybe could see the renovation of the juvenile facility into basically being the women's portion of the adult detention program, segregate them over in their own separate building. Take your, do whatever renovations, go after whatever grant funding that Dean, you sit on some of those boards and commissions at the state level, where we can maybe retrofit the old CCF site and turn that into our AB 109 facility, where whether they're in county AB 109 or out of county AB 109, but you're more hardcore long-term, and segregate them from, the other part of it, and get into a situation where maybe you could, you've got the footprint there, but maybe come up with a more efficient way of managing. I know with the tour we had of the jail that there was, you guys have some issues to kind of deal with, and we could see what that's at. And so given that, I've been kind of, just following, I'm thinking to myself, if we're subsidizing any sort of a program, maybe we could bring about some sort of a realignment. And I'd like to ask, not as it relates to the budget this week or at this time, but maybe over the next few months, Marty, if we could, have
One of
a,
the ones on
have a discussion about what it would mean for us to reorganize it. And if we're gonna be stuck paying the bill, the costs are shifted down to us, can we do something a little bit more proactive and more efficient? Or maybe we get more bang for our buck, or at least in terms of creating the to tiers and level. I mean, the campus is right there. I mean, you have your administrative building right in the middle of where these facilities are. So it's not like you're dealing with transportation across town and so forth. I mean, it's as such. But, you know, I think that the underutilization, and you know, from the get-go, when we were given the grant for the juvenile hall, there's never been, from day one, since 1991, there's never been adequate funding for the operation of that facility. We had, yeah, here's the money to build it, you guys figure out how to do it. I remember when we had the ribbon cutting, I showed up and disappointed staff when I showed up with a chain, wrapped it around the door and symbolically, you know, indicated that, and haven't been impressed with what we've done with it since, despite what the judge promised us and the Juvenile Justice Commission that you sat on, Mr. Chairman, for a time period. You know, it was all touted and was all the warm and fuzzy, but I gotta tell you, it just hasn't happened. And when you look at your numbers and you compare it with those additional numbers, we need to think outside of the box. We need to think of other alternatives. And, you know, you, Dean, see the proposal